Okay, what we are doing today is Zion Amud Aleph, the Mishnah, starting at there are two Mishnayos. We're starting at the top of Zion Amud Aleph, the Mishnah. The Mishnah tells us, Keset Oiselo, how do we act with this woman who has now had kinui and steer done to her? I just want to point out that the first Mishnah on Beis Amud Aleph had started out by telling us, Ketzam Mekanala, how do you do kinui? And we eventually explained that kinui means that you have to tell her that she cannot class herself with somebody, and she does, and does this in front of Adam, according to Eliezer, by the kinui, and then Al Piatzmer, Al Pirecha by the stira, went to one version of Eliezer, or there was Al Piatzmer, Al Pirecha by the kinui, and then Al Pishnai Adam at the stira, or according to Meshua, there was two Adam by both. Once that happened, so then we logically would have assumed that we should have then said Keser Isla. So what do you do with her once she's already had Kine and Stira? Instead, we go back to Hay. We had a Mishnah. I'm sorry, on Vav and Alpha, we had a Mishnah. The Mishnah said, "Ve'elo asur es melecho v'truma." These women, the following women, are also to eat truma. The reason that Mishnah comes over there before the Mishnah on Zion of Keser Isla is because in this Mishnah that we're saying that these women are usher to eat truma, including those who say Tamea Anilach, or the Adam came along and said that she's Tamea, or V'haim Erish Eini Shaisem, or Shabaila Ena Retzel Hashkoisa, Shabaila Bola Maderach. All of those situations are things that could have happened after it was a situation where she has already had kini and steer, and that's why that Mishnah takes place over there, in between what you would have thought is the next obvious question, which is, okay, so she had kini and steer that happened to her, so now what do we do next? The reason is because it could have been an interim stage that if the Adam, were saying that she did stira, and Slahan is like, okay, I'm going to go take her now to Yerushalayim to do the trial of the Sotah. She says, I'm not drinking. So she would become Aser, even if she never actually goes to Yerushalayim, she'd become Aser to eat Truma. Right? If the husband says, you know what, yeah, it's true they're Aiden with the Kiyun steer, but I'm just not taking it to Yerushalayim. So she's becoming Aser to eat Truma right then and there before she ever goes on the journey. That's the reason why that mission takes place prior to the mission on Zion. Now, getting back to the Mishnah on Zion, the Mishnah tells us, Ketzad Allah. So what do we do to her? Malich Beis Din, First, we take her to the local Beis Din. That should bring you echoes of Makkas, right? We had the same lashon that appears there in Makkas. Then over here, you give two Talmid Chacham to accompany the husband who's taken his wife, who has had kinyan steer done to her, to ensure that he does not have relationships on the road. Because one of the things that we say in the pasuk is v'nika ish me'avon v'yisha hiti so'at avono. Masa ish nika me'avon, when he doesn't do an appropriate bia at this stage, after kinyan stira, she is usher to him until she passes the trial of the Sotah. So technically, he is usher to her, and therefore, as we'll see in the Gemara, we're not 100% convinced that he will remain chaste with her. So therefore, we send Talmid Chacham with him to prevent him from engaging in marital relations. Rebuda says, no, you don't have to actually send witnesses with her. We trust her. We trust him that if he says that he's not doing anything, then he hasn't done anything, and therefore it's sufficient for him to go with her to Yerushalayim. You do not need to go with an entourage of Talmid Chachamim. In the Mishnah in Marcus, there in the second parak, Mishnah Hay, over there, the Mishnah told us, remember, the person who has killed B'Shegeg, so he has, the susceptibility that he can be killed by the Gal Adam. So you bring along two Talmid Chacham with him to help him when he's going to the Ar Miklat, essentially to protect him against the Gal Adam, to tell the Gal Adam, look, this is Tam B'Shegeg, don't kill him, etc. All right, so From the Mishnah, we just see a fundamental machlekes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Tanakama as to whether or not Edom are required on the journey to Yerushalayim. Everyone agrees that the husband is to go with her for the Sotah ordeal. You don't send her alone. The husband's supposed to be there with her. But the question is whether or not there are Talmid Chachamim that are sent along with him or not. Just want to point out Rashi says over here. Look at Rashi. Rashi says, Shem Yovel B'derech. Rashi says a lashon shetzarech lahashkoisa b'Yerushalayim bebeis din hagadol. You have to give her to drink in Yerushalayim in the beis din hagadol. Now that's interesting lashon of Rashi because we understand that the processing contains that you first go to the local beis din. The local beis din then sends you along to Talmid Chacham according to the Tanakama. According to Rabbi Yehuda, the Baal is never perhaps you don't even have to go to the local beis din at all. You go straight to Yerushalayim. Perhaps, I'm not sure. But Rashi is telling us that when we go, and we're going to say in the next Mishnah, you bring her to the large beis din in Yerushalayim. What is the large beis din in Yerushalayim? So let's turn the page for a moment to Zion and Beis. And you look in there at the Gemara says, Minani Mili. How do you know? Now we're talking about the second Mishnah here, where it says that you take her to the beis din hagadol shebushalayim. And Rashi says, look at Rashi there on Zion and Beis. Minani Mili, Dibaya beis din hagadol. That you need the beis din hagadol. Nehek di b'Yerushalayim ba'inam la'ashkoisa. I understand that you need to give her to drink in Yerushalayim. Because the Pasuk says that to be done for Hashem, but Hashem is considered by the Beis Hamikdash only. But how do you know that had to be the Beis Din of 71? Remember that in Yerushalayim, before you got to the Beis Din of 71, there was two other Bati Dinim that lived there, both of 23. Echad Yeshav Ezach Harbayis, the Echad Yeshav El Pesach Azar, one that sat in the Pesach of the Harbayis, one that sat in the Pesach of the Azar. That is to say, when you say you have to be taken to the Beis Din HaGadol Shebushalayim, who says it's not the Beis Din of 23? Beis Din of 23 is kosher for capital punishment, for capital crime. So the Gemara is going to come out. We're going to see tomorrow. The Gemara is going to come out and give us a Gzera Shava to tell you how you know that's the Beis Din of 71, that it has to be there to give her to drink. So that comes out that Rashi is telling us both over here on Zion and Beis and here in this Rashi on Zion and Aleph that we need Lifnei Hashem because the pasuk says V'hemer asa ish Lifnei Hashem. But what is that Amud Lifnei Hashem required for? Is it merely required that it take place in Yerushalayim by the Beis Din HaGadol of 23, or is it required that it goes to the Beis Din of 71? And what is required to go to the Beis Din of 71? The whole entire Sotah process. Rashi is telling us, Shetzarech la'ashkos of Yerushalayim Beis Din HaGadol, we need to make her drink. The Sotah process, we'll see, it entails a lot of details. We're going to learn some of those details in the next Mishnah. But those details, says Rashi, including making her drink, all has to be done by the Beis Din of Shivim Ve'echad. Now, if you look at the Rambam is clear. The Rambam agrees with this. The Rambam in two places, both in Hilchas Sotah and in Hilchas Sanhedrin, the Rambam seems to echo this fully. The Rambam tells us, and I should be clear before we look at the Rambam, that if you look at the Mishnah later on Zion, the second Mishnah, the Mishnah tells us that we take her up to the eastern gate. This is towards the end of the Zion and Aleph. So we take her up to the eastern gate of Beis Hamikdash, which is by the doorway of the Shar Nikanor. Shesham mashkin es hasoites, umataris hayolos, umataris hamitziron. That's the place where we do the hashkar of the Sotah. Rashi is telling us that hashkar has to be with the Beis Din of Shivim Ve'echad. All the process that we're going to be learning about has to be done with the Beis Din of Shivim Ve'echad. The hashkar is toward the end of the process. That all has to be done with the Beis Din of Shivim Ve'echad. And Rashi the Shita is echoed also by the Rambam. The Rambam tells us, if we look in Hilchos Sotah, in Paragim Halach Aleph, Rambam says, "She'ein mashkin es Sotah el bebeis nagadol shel shivim sekenim b'beis hamikdash." You're mashkin Sotah with a basin of 70. And if you look in Hilchos Sanhedrin, Parakei Halach Aleph, Rambam says, "V'lo mashkin es Sotah el bebeis nagadol." However, if we look at Tosfos, the top Tosfos in Zion on the base, Tosfos says, Tosfos is bothered by a question. Tosfos' question, as we'll see more tomorrow, Tosfos says, this Bezdin of Shivim Ve'echad, is that a requirement? Then why wasn't it mentioned in the list of the things that were required of Bezdin of Shivim Ve'echad in the first mission in Sanhedrin? So Tosfos, as opposed to Tosfos Shans, here on Zion Amanaf, who says there was ton of a shiur that was left out. It was left out Zakin Mamre. Tosfos says, no. Tosfos says, the Gemar Shel Sotah. The end of the din of the Sotah, which most likely includes the Hashkah, was done. The Beis Din Shel Shivim was not the initial process of the Sotah was done Beis Din Shel Shivim, yes, but not the Hashkah. The Gemara of the Sotah, which presumably includes the Hashkah, was not done Beis Din Shel Shivim. And I point out to you, if you look at Tosfos on the top of Ches Amud Aleph, Tosfos says in the Divrei Matzah Shasham, the top Tosfos, says here, the Kain stands outside. She stands inside because we need Mukar from Hashem. According to Tosfos, he's not debating the idea that it's done by Sharon. It's not debating the idea that it's to be done with Hashem. It has to be everything with Hashem. But do you need the base of Shim Ve'echad participating in everything, or just sort of the beginning stages of the site? It seems from Tosfos that the Gemara of the site doesn't have to be the base of Shim Ve'echad, and that's why it's not included in the beginning of the Mishnah Sanhedrin. Whereas according to the Tosfos Shans, it's not included because the Mishnah left out things. The Mishnah leaves out things all the time. So then according to Tosfos Shans, you could say that he agrees with the Rambam. You could say that, or Rashi, that in fact even the Hashkah has to be done I did the Bezdin of Shivim Ve'echad. But according to Tosfos, no. According to Tosfos, the Hashkah is not done by the Bezdin of Shivim Ve'echad because the Gemara of Sotah is not done by the Bezdin of Shivim Ve'echad. And the reason that Tosfos has to say that is because according to Tosfos, if it was really done by the Shivim Ve'echad, it had to be included in the beginning of the Mishnah Sanhedrin, which tells us all of the cases where you require the Bezdin of Shivim Ve'echad. Whereas according to Rashi and the Rambam, they go to Tosfos Shans and say, no, the reason it wasn't included in the Mishnah there in Sanhedrin is because it's on Shia. The rabbis left it out. They left out other things as well. All right. That is the Mishnah. Now let's move on to the Gemara. The Gemara tells us, so we have said that two Talmidei Chachamim were required to be sent along with the husband to accompany him on the journey. Shema Yovel Bedarach. So says the Gemara, Trei V'iyu Hatlasa. Two people and the husband, that means that there's three. So Leil Musay Leil Rav, let's say this is the right to Rav. The Gemara tells the Kedushin in relation to the Hilchos of Yichud, which we know was started by David HaMelech after the Ma'aseh with Amnon and Tamar. The Amar Rav Yudam Rav Lo Shanu Ela Be'ir, that the rules of Yichud that would say that if there are two people, that there's certainly no problem with Yichud, that that's true only in the city. But on the road, you need to have at least three people. On the road, you need to have at least three people. Shema yitztarach echa mem l'nikavav, because maybe one of them would be required to go to the washroom. And as Rashi said over there, he's going to go some distance away in order to have, appropriate sneers. And you can end up having one person who is siach with the erva. So therefore, on the road, you always have to have three in case one person needs the bathroom. So let's say this is a right to Rav's halacha, and normally we said there's no issue if two people are sharing to be with somebody, to be with a woman in the city. There's no issue of yichud. However, baderech, since there's a possibility of an additional harchaka could be needed because of somebody needing the washroom, and since there being no local washroom and having to go far away for issues of tznius, so as a result of that, there would only be one person with the person, and one person else would be a violation of yichud. So therefore, we have to have two people Or at all times. And how are you going to get two people at all times? You have to essentially add a third person. So maybe that you see they're requiring three people to go with this woman, the Sotah, to Yerushalayim. So maybe that is because of Rav's din. Says the Gemara, no, it's not because of Rav's din. Loi says the Marhacha Hanutema Kiechet Lava La Sadi Tam Chacham. I'm sorry, Loi Hacha Hanutema Kiechet Lava La Sadi. The reason that we are requiring two Adam Tam Chacham to be going with him is because of the fact that we want to have witnesses that are going to essentially, as Rashi says, Im Yovei Aleo, if he's going to want to have relations with his wife, he either lives the base Nagadol, Lo Yishkoa. He's going. These Adam are going to be there to say, look, this guy is not Minukum oven. He has done something wrong. Therefore, he shouldn't be allowed to give his wife a set to trial. So we're not having three people accompany her because of the fact that we hold it Rav. It's not a right to Rav. They have three people on the road in case one person needs the bathroom. No, nothing to do with that. We want to have two Adam who are going to be witnesses, who are going to tell us that he is not Roy to give his wife the Mesa to trial because of the fact that he was intimate with him. Says the Gemara, Talmidei Chachamim. The Mishnah told us very specifically that you have to be Meister Shtei Talmidei Chachamim. You have to give two Talmidei Chachamim, which is mashma that regular people would not be sufficient. Talmidei Chachamim and Kulei Amaloi. It's mashma that it has to be two Talmidei Chachamim, and regular people would not have been sufficient. Maybe there's a right to another point that Rav made. Again, Rav said in the name of Rav, maybe the reason required to Chachamim is because Rav said that these laws of Yichud, and one person will be considered Yichud, but two people are not, if they're Kesherim, but if they're Prutzim, then even 10 people are not sufficient. So we want to say to Chachamim because of the fact that if they were Prutzim, then no amount of them would be sufficient. Says more, no, there's a gap there, right, in your logic. We could have said, send them along to Ksherim, but we didn't. We said, send them along to Tamil Chachanim. So it's not sufficient to simply say Ksherim. So it's nothing to do with Rav. Again, for Rav's point, to say that there is an issue of Yichud, if people are Prutzim, even if you have 10 people, it wouldn't be sufficient, is not relevant to here. Here, we're not saying send along to Ksherim. That would be a proof then to do with Rav. But we're not. Here with the Matutim Chachamim, we're going above and beyond what Rav would require. It's nothing to do with Rav. The reason that we are requiring Tutim Chachamim is for, again, as we mentioned before, a different reason. Says the Gemara, what did we Rav say? Lo sharak shenov prutzen afilu asar nami loy. Right? Even prutzen, even 10 is not going to be sufficient. And bas shohaya v'haitzir asar mamita. This situation where someone was being taken out on a funeral prior the beer, she's pretending to be dead, and they acted inappropriately with her. This is, I guess, some sort of a plot or whatever. I mean, the desperation, I guess, that people want to. But it says, what has nothing to do with this? No, the reason over here we're saying two Talmidei Chachamim is because they know how to warn him. They know how to give him a and say, listen, listen, husband, if you're going to do this, you're not going to be able to give her the Sotah waters. As Rashi says, they're going to tell him that if the husband is not clean, right, because he was having relations with her once she already became Muslim, that the water is not going to be checking you out. The Rambam explains that it's not just merely this, right? It is if the husband's ever been Baal B'Yisur, it's not going to be checking her out. But the point being that these Adam are Yodea L'Asrei. They know how to warn him. So it's a little bit of a different focus than what we said previously. The Mishnah told us the fear is maybe he's going to have relations on the road, and she shouldn't be getting the Mesai to them, which we will have two witnesses who will be able to attest to that in the Beis Nagonim. Now we're saying it's a more proactive job. It's not merely going to the Beis Din and telling the Beis Din, look, he had relations with her, but they're there to say to the husband, you're not allowed to do this. she's also to you right now until they decide to try. And so therefore, since they know how to do Asra and they are appropriately capable of doing that, that's the reason we're sending Talmid Chachamim, not merely Ksherim. So they know how to give Asra to such a person. I should point out that Tosfos over here says, in the second to top Tosfos, it says, Ki hecha diadi lasriye, that they know how to give her Asra. So Tosfos says that, let's look at the last line of Tosfos, Alma Gabe Hasra being Talmid Chachamim. Now, when it comes to Asra, you really do need to have people who are Talmid Chachamim. And it's a very interesting line of Tosfos, because I'm not sure that that is necessarily going to be the halacha. The Gemara told us in in Makis on Bavim and Beis that even a shade could do Asra. And the Rambam Hilchos Sanhedrin Paragid Beis tells us that Afil Isha, Afil Evet is kosher to give Asra, meaning it's not necessarily a requirement to Chacham, right? Even the Hayrek can give Asra, not a Talmid Chacham necessarily. So I'm not 100% clear that this is not a Machlokes Rishonim. Tosfos seems to be indicating that it is a requirement that the people give Asra be Talmid Chachamim. Remember, these people are being sent here as Edom, in case he was to act in an inappropriate fashion, they could tell the Beis Din Gadol, and therefore that they wouldn't give the guy to drink. And now we're sort of adding to their job description. That's not merely there as witnesses, oh, he did something wrong, but also to warn him and say that he didn't. So they have a job, a status as Edom if he does something wrong, but also that before he did something wrong, they should be able to tell him, hey, don't do that. The Rambam in the Pirush Mishnah points out that the job of these two Talmid Chachamim, because they know Hasra, they know how to do it, and they'll prevent them from coming too close to her. So in other words, it's sort of like they have a proactive role here as well. It's not just here, to stay on the side like little mice and just witness what's going on. They have a proactive role that says that you have to stop the husband from doing this. Yeah. Okay. Now let's go to the next Gemara. So the Gemara tells us as follows: Rabbi Yehuda disagreed. Rabbi Yehuda said that the Baal was Neman. You don't have to send him with any Edom. And we said we're not sure 100% if according to Rabbi Yehuda you have to go actually stop off in the Beis Din or not. But either way, you don't have to have Talmid Chacham that are going to accompany him on the derech. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda Emer Baal Neman Tanya. We have a brisa that tells us as follows: the Tosefta. Here in Sotah tells us as follows: the husband's believed on his wife from a kavachemer. Mani the sheep requires balan emanale. Sotah sheep allow the kol shkem manach anida, which is chayv kares, and that's obviously very significant punishment for a husband who sleeps with a nido. Nevertheless, husband's allowed to have yich with a nido. Again, if they just got married, if there's a chubas nida situation, and they never actually had relations, so that's a different story. But aside from that, there's no issue with yichud. Husband, his wife is trusted. How's that? How's it trusted? Isn't it chiv kores? So a for sure, you kal v'chomer. That's Sotah she belav, like Kolshkin Sotah, which is just a lav. So for sure, the husband should be trusted. That's Yehuda's logic. The Rabbanan and the Rabbanan disagree. Here I said this. They say it's mamish the opposite. What you think is the reason as the kal v'chomer to say that the husband would be believed to go alone is actually the reason that we say he's not believed. According to the Rabbanan, neither the kares chamir like Haman. According to the Rabbanan, because neither it's chiv kares, it's so chomer, and therefore he is going to be believed. Sotah the lav lechamir lev lemem. Sotah, which is just in the situation of a lav, and won't be believed. Now, first of all, what's the lav about a Sotah? So Rashi explains. Now later on, we're going to see in Yavamas. The pasuk tells us, "Lo yuchal ba'al harishon loshu l'kachta asher acher asher tama." It's a lav. You're not allowed to do to remarry the woman after she's been married to someone else. So there's an isser to remarry her. So the Gemara there says, "Mani mekam acher asher tama." The rabbi said to Shemistro, a woman who was a saito who had stira done to her, but she never drank. It's also to be married to her again. So that's the law that you're being over. Says Rabbi Yehuda, if that's just the law that you're being over. And Nida is a situation where you're over in Chiv Karas. So it's a lot worse, a lot more severe. So if we trust the husband to have equal with his wife, when the Chiv is Karas, then for sure I'm going to trust him to have equal with his wife. I'm sure I'm going to trust him when it's just the Israel of Alav. Says the Rabbi, no. When it's an Israel of Alav, it's not such a big deal in his mind. So therefore, we specifically can't trust him. That's the machlokes here between the Rabbanan and the Tanakam. I'm sorry, Rabbanan and Rabbi Yehuda. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda Mikal Chayim Ma'aseh, does Rabbi Yehuda really learn this out of a Kal Chayim? Or Rabbi Yehuda Mikroim Ma'aseh, Rabbi Yehuda learns this out of a pasuk. He doesn't learn out of a Kal Chayim. The Tanakh is learning a brayso Devi says, "Shishtei Elokeim and Atera Ishmi Ve'Sishtei." We have a brayso again, the Tosefta tells us that a man brings the wife to the Kaim Min Torah, according to the simple words of the Chumash, Ha'ish Ve'Sishtei. The husband brings the wife. The rabbis added a point that said, no, he has to go with two witnesses on the road. Rabbi Yasi now echoes what we've heard before. If the husband is believed, you don't have to send him to come with him. Why? He's believed because of a kavachemer. Just like the neither, which is a chiv kar, is much more severe. The husband is believed. So Sotah, which is just allowed, like Koshkin, so Sotah, which is just allowed, it's a much lower level of type of Isser. So of course the husband should be believed. So Amrullah, they said to him, Im Amris benida shekain yesh laheder. They said to him, 1 second, Baida, nida, there is a situation of heder. Im Amris benida shekain yesh laheder. By the nida, there is a heder. What's the heder by nida? The heder is that over time, whenever she goes to the mikvah, she'll be mutter again. That's the reason why, even though it's so severe, we could trust him, because it's in a sense past beside, it's in a sense going to be available to him again. By the Sotah, it'll never be a heter. If she dies by the Sotah, it's never going to happen again. And it's theoretically possible. This is the last opportunity. So there's not going to be a shas heter. So long as she doesn't drink and survive, there's never a shas heter again. And we say in Pasuk, tells the Mishnah that the stolen waters are the sweetest. Right? So let's just finish the Gemara. But first to understand, what does it mean? You talk about the sweet waters are stolen waters are the sweetest. The Tosfos points out that what we mean this Vayimer, the bottom Tosfos on the page, the Tosfos says, is the parish is as follows: that the Yetzer Hara of someone is takeeth when there's no heter to the Isser. Then he will say he has no time to wait. He has to take advantage of the moment. Because and if you're going to say, but he's known her. It's not like a situation where he doesn't know. He knows he's already been with her before. So he says no. Even though he was very violent with her, but in the past, nevertheless, when I'm doing me talking, because of the fact that it's illegal, so it becomes sweeter again. That's the reason why we're bringing out this volume, this extra pasuk, is because, while it's true that the Kavachaim of Rabbi Yasi, similar to when we said about Rabbi Yehuda, that when it came to Anida, which is an Isser of Karas, and we believe him, so for sure we should believe him by Isser of Alav. So says the rabbis, no, we're not going to do that. By Anida is a heter. So since it's a Shas heter, therefore we believe him. By Sotah, there's no Shas heter, therefore we're never going to believe him. And not only that, Man Gnuvim talk. In other words, even if he was already Baller in the past, even though he already knows so. Nevertheless, since it's also now, and since there's no going to be, so it makes it much more sweeter. Since it's not going to be a Shas Heter, if she doesn't survive this Sotah deal, it makes it that much more susceptible. Then the more goes with a seems to be a third opinion. I remember in Torah, Ish maybe it's Ishtal Chaim, Shnem Vayiv Ishtal. So it says in more 1 second. Here, Rabbi Huda says that we learn out from a pasuk. Before he said Rabbi Huda learned out from a Kabbalah, says the more Amar Lahu or Kabbalah, Bereisha or Perchua. Says the more initially Rabbi Huda we were quoting him. He said that he learned out from a Kabbalah, but we blew it off. We slugged it up. And so now we're saying that Rabbi Huda actually learns it out from Xeris Akasim. Yosef only learns it out from Kabbalah. Rabbi Huda learns it out from Xeris Akasim. So I'm looking at that's therefore he moved on to learn out from the pasuk directly. Behavior is a shishtai. You see that the husband is neman to take her to the Sotah tribe. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Huda and Tanakama. Is Rabbi Huda then the Tanakama? What do you mean Rabbi Huda the Tanakama? Is Rabbi Huda the Tanakama? Because the Tanakama also says positive behavior is ishtai. Says more no. This is the difference. The difference was whether or not you say avol amul. If you look back in the beginning of this brisa. The Brisa told us that according to Rabbi Huda, the Brisa told us that the first man Namar, whoever it was, the Tanakama in this Brisa, the Tanakama said that there was a Heves Shistoi, and Aval Amr Chacham Moisin Loshin Mecham, meaning the pasuk says the husband's believed, and the rabbi said no, you have to take the Mechacham. So we have basically three shittas. Two shittas learn that the husband's believed. You don't need to Tamil Chachamim from the pasuk behavior says Shishta. One is Rabbi Huda, one is the Tanakama in this brisa. But the Tanakama in the brisa says Aval Amr Chachamim. But the rabbis, even though there was a pasuk that says that the husband's believing, the brisa, the rabbi said you have to have two Tamil Chachamim. And you have the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, which was once the opinion of Rabbi Huda, but Rabbi Huda rejected it because of the rabbi slugging it up, which is the opinion of a Kabbalah. It says that the Manachanida, which is Isser Karis, is believed. So by an Isser of Alav, the husband is Kabbalah for sure going to be believed. Now, from over here, we have to go to very interesting Taisus. Taisus points out over here in the Taisus of Amar Luhu Kabbalah Uperchua. So Taisus says, notice that the difference in slugging up when we thought Rabbi Huda was learning out from a Kabbalah versus when Rabbi Yossi was learning out from a Kabbalah are different. In the first one that we slugged up, we said what? That the rabbis were pointing out to Rabbi Yehuda, the Hinai Senes, neither the Karis Chamirale Umemin. By Nido, it's very much Chamor, so that's why we believe him. And Sotah, which is allowed, is not so Chamor, so that's why we don't believe him. You're saying it's a Kabbalah, might if we believe him by Karis, so I'm sure we should believe him by Alav. I said, by Karis, he's going to take it super serious. But by Alav, he's not going to take it super serious. If we don't trust him. And the second, we said, what's the reason why we don't believe him? Is because by Nida, there's a Shas Heter. So that's why we could trust him. By the Sotah, if she doesn't survive the ordeal, there's no Shas Heter. All right, even because afterwards they'll laugh. Right, he's never allowed to go and marry her again. There's no possibility of a Shas Heter. And so therefore, unless she has unsaid the trial and she's become committed to him again, he's not able to remarry her. Right? Once she's a kid in steer, if they get divorced, it's such you can't remarry her. So therefore, she's never a Shas Heter again. So therefore, we can't trust him. So there are two different reasons. One is based upon whether or not there's a Shas Heter, and one is based on the fact that one is more Chama. So Taisa says, why is it that we have to switch? Why can't we just use the first percha again? So Taisa says something very interesting. Taisa says, what we see from here, we need another percha. The ashkam beduchte sagin, the chamira leinchi avera kala mistafu minit feb avera chamor. Taisa says that the reason we're not saying the same percha a second time, the first percha a second time, is because it doesn't really work. The first percha was based on the fact that Nida is Bekaris, so therefore he takes it super serious. Versus Sotah, which is allowed, he doesn't take it so serious. He says that percha is not always true. That percha is not always true. There are times where you see people take something super serious and they shouldn't be taking it so serious. There are times that people take an Avera Kala more serious than they take Avera Chamura. He brings down an example, beginning Ksubis, the Chamilu Avera still have it on the Rabbanim, and it should be cars. Because they take Averas, which is just the Rabbanim, more strong than they take Nida, which is cars. We're not getting to the topic of Avelos now, but certainly Avelos Shiva, right? But part of that Avelos has to be just being Rabbanim, and they're taking that more seriously than Hilchastina, which is Bekaris. Or the Gemara tells us in Gittin and Dalan, Chamilu Shvias, the Lek El Alav, Mishamish Skill, they took Shvias more serious, which is just Alav, more serious than Shamas, which is Hilchas Skila. So we see Alma Zilnin Daily Mikela Tzvei Mechamerta. We see something they take things that are more makel, more severe than take something that is more chamer. So therefore, we prefer, instead of saying that the reason that it's not a kal v'chomer is because of the fact that Sotah is much more kal than Hilchos Nida, because for some people they'll take the Isser Kal more seriously than they take the Isser Chomer. So that's not a good reason. Therefore, we wanted to talk about the Shas Heter, right? Nida is Shas Heter, and so there's no Shas Heter. This leads me on to this topic of discussing the idea that people take the hierarchy of values in halacha in the wrong way. First of all, on Taisa's point that sometimes Shabbos was taken not so seriously, we see to the contrary. Right? We see to the contrary as well. We see that there are times people took Shabbos incredibly seriously. The Gemara told us in Brachas and Gimel, we had the Gemara when we were doing the Amud over there. If you remember that if you saw a person carrying an avuka right next to Shabbos, who's carrying a torch, right? If it's a kid, maybe you can't make an assumption, but if it was an adult, 100% you can make an assumption that it's not Shabbos, right? Because an adult wouldn't do that. An adult wouldn't be lighting on Shabbos, right? The Mishnah in Demai in the fourth paragraph, Mishnah Aleph told us that in Amaretz, if you were to ask him on Shabbos about the provenance of certain, produce, 100%, whatever it says, trust him. But Shabbos can't trust it. But Shabbos, not going to lie on Shabbos. People took Shabbos seriously. Even Amaratzim took Shabbos seriously. Such a thing once existed. So there were clearly times when people took their duties very seriously. They took them very seriously. They took Shabbos very seriously. But clearly there are times that are not. But this fundamental question about taking the Rabbanans more seriously than taking the Araisas, that sometimes people do that. That, in a sense, makes sense because think about what the rabbi said. This week's parasha by Shaitim, we know the Rambam in Sherish Aleph and Sefer Mitzvahs tells us that Loisasar, people want to count because of Loisasar, right? Basi says, Al Piater Asher Yerucha and Loisasar, that there's a Mitzvah Aseh, Mitzvah Loisaseh for every Drabbana. So therefore they want to count Netias Yadayim and Hanukkah and Purim from the Mitzvahs of the Taryag. The Rambam goes crazy about it and says, of course not, you can't do that. But we do hold that when a person's over and the Rabbanah is over on the Loisasar, it's not a separate mitzvah, but he's over on the Loisasar. If he keeps the mitzvah, Rabbanah is Mekayim mitzvah Asisa. That's the Rambam in the beginning of their Hilchos Mamrim. Well, the Rambam is very clear that every mitzvah that is a Rabbanah, whether it's a Gezerah or it's from the Yom whatever, anything that's a Rabbanah is going to be going in to the mitzvah of Loisasar and Basisi, if it's not a separate mitzvah in the Sefer mitzvahs. And the rabbis put a big siyag, they put big guardrails, big fences around. As we just mentioned, the Gemara in Haim Beit, it's somebody who's mizalz on Tchilas Yadayim. Right, we said back on Dalan, I'm sorry, call mizalz on Tchilas Yadayim necker min ha'olam. And I mentioned over there the Gemara in Erev and Chaf Aleph about Kiva refusing to take the water before, he refused to take the water to drink before he washed Tchilas Yadayim because someone said, even the words from the Chacham is Chayv Misa, I think more in Brachas Dalam Beis we mentioned when we did the Amud Yomi that a person is over on the word of Chacham is Chayim Misa. That's why he has to go home afterwards. First, he has to go to Beis Medrash, do Shema, and learn a little bit. Then he goes home to eat. This taking the words of the rabbis very, very seriously is something that is fundamental. So you can understand how it could happen that people will take the Rabbanans more seriously than the Arises. But that's it within the hierarchy of values. We know some of these Rabbanan, some is a Deraisa. When it comes to Savat Rabbanan, you're Megil. Some of the Deraisa, you go L'chumra. There's fundamental differences between them. But the biggest point that I want to mention about people that have a misaligned hierarchy of values is when it comes to the prevalence of putting Miran Chaverai second to Miran L'Makim. When you're over on Miran L'Makim, you're over on one thing. Miran L'Makim, it's you and their Ben Shalom. When you're over on Miran Chaverai, you're over Miran Chaverai and a Miran L'Makim. Everyone knows the Sifra. Kiva says that everyone knows the Mar Shabbos, Mandasani, the Chaver Chal Tavid, the negative formulation of Hillel. Everyone's familiar with the idea that this is fundamental. Sinus things with the short of English according to the Mar Yuma test. And nevertheless, people on Mizazim on the Chaver, everyone's focusing on our Chaim, what is time our Chaim. But the Chashem Mishpat and Yeridei, everyone has the things that involve interpersonal relations, that they're Mizazlan, that they don't take us seriously. Even though that is far more important. Yerushalmi in Peah, Parak Aleph, Halach Aleph, Yerushalmi tells us that the first Beis Hamikdash, before the first Beis Hamikdash, during the times of David Melech, people died in wars because they had Dilator and they had certain informers, they had people who were not acting in appropriate fashion on the very issues. Even though everybody was telling Chachamim, whereas in times of Achav, where they had Mamash Aviv terrible people. Nevertheless, they didn't die in wars because there was no Chaver issues. So people can have misalignment of values 100%. And so when I take it out from this thesis, is that the misalignment of values, it changes over time. But over the last 2,000 years, the misalignment of values is putting the Makim ahead of the Ben Chaver. I'll have to stop over here. We'll do the next Mishnah as part of Zion on the base. Have a wonderful day.